Okay, so you had just taken out your fitness landscapes and started to compare them with each other. Take another couple of seconds to, if you've seen someone's fitness landscape that's right beside you, compare with other people at your table. Just take a minute or two.
Once I got the box, but
Good.
go that way.
That works, you know.
Okay, so now that you have a feel for what different people tried as far as depicting a fitness landscape that included both reproduction and survival, I want us to step back for a moment and think about what fitness is. Okay, so what components make up fitness? What's the definition of fitness? And if you know the answer to one of those questions but not both, that's fine too. So let's define fitness in as many ways, evolutionary fitness, as we can. What do you think?
Ability for an organism to survive and reproduce.
Okay, so the two components really of fitness, the two main components are survival and reproduction. Okay, so I had given you a very challenging task, and that was to make a fitness landscape that depicted two elements of fitness. That's tough. One way to do that is to collapse those two elements into one figure. There's one way to do that. Your fitness really is how successful you are at spreading your genotype to the next generation. And one measure of that, and there are many measures and many arguments over what measure is best, one measurement of that is lifetime reproductive success. And that is the sum of age-specific survival the probability of age-specific survival and the predicted age-specific reproduction. Okay, so L sub x would be defined as age-specific survival, probability of survival. M sub x would be defined as age-specific reproductive output. So this is one measure. This is one way in which you can combine. Go ahead.
So what exactly are you summing? You're summing these measures at different ages or between different individuals, or?
That's an excellent question.
Across all ages, right?
Across all ages for a given genotype. Okay. So x to infinity. Does it go on the top or the bottom?
That goes on the bottom.
On the bottom.
Oh wait, the infinity?
The range of some.
X equals 1 and infinity is at the top.
X equals 1.
Yeah, because that's where you start.
So x to x.
X equals 1 and you're summing from 1 to infinity.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
It's a weird convention.
Yep. I never remember it. Okay.
Is there a particular scale on which this is done, or does it vary from species to species based on what the researcher wants?
It's going to vary from species to species based on what is logical for the creature. And what's logical is going to be somewhat arbitrary. For some things, it's very natural. Like for animals that have clutches of offspring, and they'll have one clutch every season, each year, right? And so maybe it's a bird that lays one clutch of eggs per spring, let's say, and doesn't reproduce in other times of the year. And for that type of animal, it seems relatively logical that you would just say, okay, well, this is going to be annual survival and reproductive output. For organisms that have overlapping generations, they're constantly reproducing, then that's going to be not as obvious on how to do that, and you would use the ecology of the organism to best choose how you would do that. Do you have something to add?
Organisms that reproduce by binary fission, especially problematic in thinking of it in this way.
Yes, and so in that way, and this is why this particular measure is not great for all species and in all circumstances. There's a hot debate. There are like, there are 3 main different ways of getting an overall fitness value, but this is probably the one I think that is most intuitive for you right now. Okay?
And it's one of those examples of the more you learn in biology, the less you can have pat answers for questions.
Right.
Because you learn about all of the ways in which lifetime reproductive success isn't necessarily a great measure of fitness for, situation X, situation Y. Behavioral ecologists, which oftentimes don't follow organisms over their entire lifespan, they use surrogates for fitness, like sprint speed, and correlates of fitness, like if you're fast, you can avoid predation, so you're probably going to survive better.
Right.
Simply because you don't have the time or the energy or the money to follow organisms throughout your entire lives. So it becomes very complicated and pragmatic in terms of what you use for this.
Right, and it becomes complicated quickly. Now I
Yeah.
wanted to, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing, yes.
Yeah, it does.
You don't have to think very far into it for it to get fairly complicated.
Right. So if you use some sort of overall measure of fitness, it can become a 2-dimensional graph again, yes? Okay. But usually you don't have all of the information you need in order to calculate an overall fitness value. Usually what you have is exactly what Dr. Polinsky said. You have some sort of proxy of something that feeds into fitness, and maybe you even have multiple measurements, but you're almost never going to be able to have all survival and all reproductive data. This is something that you can get in the lab if you work with worms, or you work with fruit flies, or maybe tribolium beetles, but you're not going to have this for snakes or lizards. You're not going to have this for most things. So although this is kind of a cheat as far as the challenge that I gave you, in making a fitness landscape that included reproduction, survival, and size in the guppy example that I gave you, this is rarely used. Usually, we don't have all of these data. So usually what we will do is we will use what are called fitness components, okay? Fitness components. Okay, so in order to think about this, what kinds of things as a guppy might go into your probability of survival?
Size.
Size, we just talked about that, so that's good. Size, okay. What might also go into your probability of survival? Maybe in the example that I gave you, or just in general, imagine yourself as guppy.
Speed.
Speed, okay, so can you escape predators by running away, or swimming away, I should say. Okay. If you're non-human, especially, there are some other things that will go into your survival, right? If you don't have doctors around. Disease. Color. Okay, so how visible you are, perhaps. Okay. So whether or not you're cryptic with your background. Is that kind of where you were going?
Yeah.
Okay. Does crypsis have an I in the end?
It's spelled exactly how you spelled it.
Okay, good. I get to the board, like I'm super great at spelling, but I get to the board and it's too big and close to my face. I don't understand why that happens. Okay, so crypsis, whether you can blend into your background, your immunity, right? Disease. Okay, I think these are some really great examples. Okay, let's think of some examples of what goes into your reproductive output as a guppy. Now there are other things that go into survival as well, but since we've got a fair suite of examples, I'm going to move on to reproduction. What would go into your reproductive success as a guppy? Thank you. First, I'll give you a little bit of background. Guppies have males and they have females. Okay, so there's no, in this system, there are no hermaphrodites. There are, don't know that we know the prevalence of parthenogenesis, but I think it's very, very low. That would mean like the female fish could just make clones of herself.
You're talking about ones in Trinidad?
Yes.
Not
Right. The females get courted by the males. The males do a fancy display of wiggles and jerks and fin extensions. And females then choose which males they would like to mate with.
Is this the fishes with the bright red colors, or is that something else I'm thinking of?
They have bright orange.
Orange.
Yeah, they have, and they'll also have sometimes blues and other colors as well. Orange seems to be very attractive to the females.
Yeah, coloration.
We do, yeah, let's put coloration. So color. Yeah. What else? What if you're a dude guppy?
Fin size.
Fin size? Sure.
For a female, being able to choose the right mate, but that's a very vague concept.
It's a good one though, because if you're a female and you choose the wrong mate, maybe none of your offspring survive. Okay? So.
I feel like there's a lot that goes into that.
And there is.
Or they survive and they fail to reproduce when they get to be adults.
Right. If you're a male, one thing that's very critical is to be able to do the right mating dance. If you're doing all kinds of crazy behavior, she's going to be like, there is something wrong with that male. He probably has some sort of brain infection. I am not mating with him. It has to be a very stereotyped dance, okay? If you guys went to a dance and you're checking out the merchandise, right? You're checking each other out. You're like, okay, I'm looking for somebody that I'm attracted to. And somebody comes in going, blah, and running all around, you're gonna wonder what's up with that person, right?
Or we could just say dancing lights, Dr. Rowe.
If someone dances like me, right? Do you guys watch Friends? You know how Phoebe runs through the park?
Yes.
That's me.
I've
Yeah,
seen Dr. Reynolds dance in her kitchen, so I can say this with some authority.
that is true. There is somewhere a video.
I just avoid dancing so
Online.
as not to embarrass myself.
Although I did that purposely to embarrass my son. Sexy Back came on, and he was sitting there in the kitchen like nothing was happening, and I was like, how can you act like nothing's happening? Right?
What came on?
Sexy Back. JT?
Sexy Bat?
No. Although,
Wasn't for
I get with this crazy biologist where you would go Sexy Bat. I get that. Okay, so males being able to do the proper courtship behavior is going to be important. If they act erratically, she is not going to choose them. Okay, so these are just examples of different traits and abilities that go into each of these two subsets of fitness. Those are what I would call fitness components. Okay. Now, my definition of fitness components is somewhat more broad and lax than others. Some people would, because it's a relatively arbitrary cutoff, basically, a fitness component is any trait that significantly impacts your fitness. Okay, so usually what researchers have are measures of fitness components, right? So they are exactly what the examples that Dr. Klinsky gave: speed, assuming that speed helps you get away from predators. They might be gape size for snakes if, food is limited to big things, for example, right? So it's also going to depend upon, very drastically upon the ecology of that organism, what qualifies as a fitness component. Okay, so I just said it would be super easy if we just cheated and said, okay, there's one measure of fitness and we're gonna put fitness here, and we're gonna put the trait here, and then it's two-dimensional, right? But that's not what we're gonna do.
How are these different? Because you're putting a fitness component into that two-dimensional fitness thing. It seems like you're assuming that these components have a sort of effect on fitness.
Excellent segue.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, so it's a great segue. So instead, we want to get as large an idea or as accurate an idea of overall fitness. We want the fitness landscape. We want as clear an idea of that fitness landscape as possible. And so what we do then is plot multiple components of fitness in order to see how they combine and be able to predict which genotypes and which phenotypes will be most successful. Or maybe just to diagram which ones that we've studied are most successful, okay? So let's go back to the example that I gave you, and we're gonna use survival and reproduction as two separate fitness components, and we're gonna graph them on the same diagram. Now, what are some of the ways that you guys tried to do that? Because maybe you're a genius and you figured it out. And maybe you're a genius and you didn't figure it out, but you thought of some logical things. Did everybody have an x-axis? Okay, that's a good place to start. We all had an x-axis. What goes on the x-axis? Size. Okay, we have big over here. We have small over here. Okay. Now, the other parts of this figure are what maybe are different from person to person. Okay. Was there anybody who, so somebody give me an example of something they put on the y-axis.
Or overall fitness.
Overall fitness, okay, and that's exactly where I would have thought, okay, this is where we need to go. In a fitness landscape, you need overall fitness to always be the y-axis. Now you can turn it in three-dimensional space, but basically you need it to be an eigenvector. How do I say that in normal words? Fitness itself is an axis of your graph, even though the other axes are components, fitness components. Okay, so we're depicting overall fitness, and if we put size right here, size is a fitness component in these guppies, yeah? It's impacting their survival and their reproduction. Okay, so it is a fitness component, so we're going to do overall fitness on the y-axis. That should be true for pretty much any fitness landscape. Have you ever seen a fitness landscape that doesn't have overall fitness as the elevation? I've not.
Well, I mean, it would be like survival, if you measure survival from 1 year to the next, or something like that. Yeah, and I think the good way of saying is elevation.
Yeah.
When you said eigenvalue, what you were getting at is elevation.
Right.
How high is the fitness at one phenotype compared to other phenotypes?
Right. So this is going to be a landscape, and I'll give you a hint, it's going to be three-dimensional. Okay. So one way to do this is to do it in 3 dimensions, which is kind of hard to do on a piece of paper, right? It's easier to do if you've got a computer program. And I'll show you an example. This is a really great animation. It's from some scientific modeling that these people did, and they were kind enough to give permission to actually put this on Wikipedia. So if you Wikipedia fitness landscapes, it will take you here. This is a fitness landscape, and in this case, we've got one trait on this axis, another trait on this axis, or rather, probably the genotypes for those traits, okay? So this is like the possible space of phenotypes that you could have in, say, any example of trait. Size, this could be coloration. The height, then, is your overall fitness. Okay? So in this case, if we had extreme size and fairly extreme coloration, those values in this three-dimensional space are going to be the highest fitness. Now this is just an animation. This is a population. It starts out here. And because it's in the valley, where there's low fitness, it's going to move up one of these peaks. And at first it's fairly random which direction it goes. And finally it ends up climbing up this one. And which peak that it goes up is going to have a little bit of element of randomness. It's also going to have impacts of something that I think maybe Isaac brought up on Monday, which is maybe one fitness component is more important than another fitness component. Okay. And then your population would be dragged in that direction. So that's what a three-dimensional one would look like on a computer. We can diagram this in 3 dimensions on a flat piece of paper as well. And so what I'm going to do is take the example that I gave you, and I'm going to break my own rule, okay, because this is on a piece of paper instead of in a computer. And I'm going to put survival on this axis. High, low, and I'm going to put reproductive output. Oops. That's not true. If you're small, oh wait, yes. Small.
If you're small, you survive. If you're large, you make babies.
Okay. If you are small, you can survive a lot, but you don't reproduce very much. You know. I may have done this the wrong way. To think about it just a second. Yeah. Okay. So if you're here, you have high survival, low reproduction, and you're small, right? If you're here, you have high reproduction. If you're big, you have low survival. Okay, so we have, I could plot the lines of how survival and reproductive output map, like they're gonna, with increasing size, increase or decrease by some function, and we can just pretend that it's linear. Okay. Fitness itself is not on here yet. What we can do is, have you guys ever seen an old topographical map? One that indicates mountains? Okay. They're not in 3D like this, right? Because when you have a map, there's often on a flat sheet of paper. You can indicate it by depth of color. This is a heat map of the topography of Missouri. Or you can indicate it by other symbols. So one of them is to indicate areas of the lowest fitness as valleys. And I should not be doing this for you. You should do this. And indicate the highest fitness as peaks. Okay, so let's, now that we've had a chance to look at our topographical map of Missouri, let's look back at our fitness landscape. Now, if they're anywhere on here, any space on this map represents a particular combination of genotypes in a single individual, right? Okay. So let's say I'm here. Okay. This is me as an individual. How I'm this big, right? I'm kind of smallish medium. I have sort of lowish survival, and I have sort of lowish reproductive output. Comparatively, what's my fitness compared to the rest of the population? Pretty low, right? Okay, and so on this type of map, you're gonna find the lowest and the highest and give them, say, pluses or minuses, and indicate your topography that way, okay? So where do you suppose the highest fitnesses are on this figure? How would you describe it? Chris?
Would it be at the intersection of the two lines?
It's going to be high at the intersection of the two lines because you're kind of hedging your bets. You've got okay reproductive output, and you've got okay survival, and you're okay size. So maybe you're not quite as noticeable to predators, you're gonna have a decent number of offspring, and you're gonna have a decent length of life. So yeah, that might be a plus here. I've already put pluses here. You could have one strategy too where you're live a very long time and have only a few offspring. And you could also have a strategy where you live a very short time but have loads of offspring. Now there are species-specific strategies, and then there's variation in strategy within that species. Okay. So what we end up with from this map is we certainly end up with a ridge of high fitness along here. What would be not a great combination to have? Where on this fitness space do you not want to be?
The lower half.
Anywhere in the lower half.
Yeah, but how would you get there?
How would you get there?
Yeah, because clearly size wouldn't be what's causing you to be in the lower half of the chart, because that's those lines there.
Okay.
The only
So if you have a genotype that puts you there,
something else though.
a genotype that,
For some other trait.
right, well, reproduction itself can be controlled by your genes, right? So, and so can your survival. There are genes for survival, there are genes for reproduction. There are genes, like stress resistance genes help you survive stressors. Genes that help you be immune to stuff helps you survive. So all of those fitness components that were in, that we just get examples, they're in here. And so you've got different possible genotypes. And so this space actually represents the space of all possible phenotypes, all possible genotype
Then
combinations.
why size there? Because then I could say, well, you want high survival and high reproduction, so the biggest plus would be right in the that top part of the graph, but size wouldn't cause that to be such. Size has its limitations.
Right, because this is actually constraining where you can go. So you're saying you would want high survival and high reproduction? Can you be that anywhere on this space?
No, exactly.
All along that line. So is it bad to be in the second half, or do we have some ridges down here too?
If you reproduce enough, then your length of your survival wouldn't necessarily matter as much in terms of your fitness.
That's correct.
Wait, what does that blue line represent?
The blue line, thank you for pointing this out, I was going to rewrite this, is the reproductive output.
Blue line is survival. Because you have high reproductive. Oh, no, you've redone your y-axis, sorry. Yep, all right.
But then the way that that axis is done, then big has low reproductive output.
That's true. Can you be an elephant who survives a very long time, but only has 1 or 2 offspring before they die? You can be an oak tree that lives a really long time.
No, my point is the y-axis is upside down.
It is,
Why?
because it's a trade-off.
But I thought you said that big guppies had more offspring.
Thus, it should be the other way around.
High reproductive output is here, so it's going this way.
Yes, but you have the blue line.
Oh,
Reproductive
you were right
output.
initially.
Because then there would only be one line. They wouldn't be intersecting. It would just be along that ridge.
I think your purple line is reproductive output and your blue line is survival.
Yep,
That's the idea for today. Only one. And it's used up. I'm definitely back.
It's okay.
I usually try to save it for about.
Because if this be the case, you just have one line going from one high to the other high.
Actually, I thought that's what you were going to do when you changed the axis. I thought you were just going to draw a single line.
My brain hurts.
So I'm going to put these back on here. We're going to talk about what parts of them should exist and what parts should not. Okay? Okay. So given that high survival gives you low reproductive output, and vice versa, well, okay, so if we plotted just reproductive output, oh yeah, the plot is on the axis. That's right. Okay, so now we have this line. What is that line though? What kind of fitness am I inferring goes along that line? High or low? High. Okay, so this would represent a ridge of possibilities that are high fitness. And so you could draw this ridge with lines that are very close together, indicating, well, I guess that'd be it. And then they get sort of further apart to sort of give a pictorial representation of topography. And it would be bad to be small with, wait, is that true? Jesus, I am really confused now. Hang on. You guys.
Can I
Please do.
try something?
Yes.
You're trying to make a three-dimensional adaptive landscape.
Yes.
There's only one phenotypic dimension.
Oh, because size?
Yeah, the size is your only phenotype. So.
Well, you can treat.
But then you have 3 dimensions.
You
It's
can
actually a
treat
4-dimensional
though.
arc.
It's because of the example I chose, guys. I'm sorry. You can treat because size is a. I see. Okay. Because size is a fitness component of both reproduction and survival. That's why I'm getting
Yes,
confused.
that's why you're
Yes.
getting
I
messed up.
picked a very bad example.
So-
My apologies.
So I'm going to try and work with it. So give me a minute.
Okay.
So how is reproductive output influenced by size? If you're small, in terms of reproductive output, what are you?
Whoa.
Low reproduction. If you're big, what are you in terms of reproductive output?
Hi.
You're high. So we'll just draw a straight line. We'll assume linearity. So,
Wait, what?
oh yeah, yeah. Let's do it this way. This is how I was thinking about it when I did my homework. So if you're small, you have low reproductive output. If you're big, you have high reproductive output. But if you're small, you have high survivorship. But if you're big, you have what in terms of survivorship?
Low.
Low. Okay. So you have these 2 lines crossing. So you don't have a three-dimensional. You don't have a three-dimensional fitness surface. You have a 2-dimensional fitness surface. And remember that Dr. Reynolds told you that you can think of lifetime reproductive success as the summation of probability of survival times reproductive output. You have to multiply this thing times that thing. When I did this, I basically said, let's multiply this line times that line. So you can have really high survival, but if you're not reproducing anything, then your actual fitness is fairly low, because if you multiply this times this, you end up somewhere down here on the low fitness side of things. If you have really high reproductive output, but your probability of being big is really low because you get killed and eaten. And once again, your fitness is not very fit. And so if you multiply this line times this line, you get an overall fitness landscape that looks like this. Because this low fitness counteracts that high fitness, this low fitness counteracts that high fitness. These two intermediate fitnesses interact together, and so you have highest fitness at intermediate sizes. Is this what you were trying to go for?
Yes.
Because you
although-
only have a single size that you're working with, a single phenotype. So I'm just multiplying these two lines together.
Yes.
Because to get a three-dimensional fitness landscape, you need two phenotypes.
Right, I was,
Treating survival and reproductive output as phenotypes also.
So in this case, it's negative parabola, an upside down parabola.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So the reason this is complicated is because it actually depends a lot on the ecology of the organism as well. Because you can have organisms in the same species and the same population taking different life history strategies.
Sure.
So you can have someone with low survival and high reproduction doing just as well as someone with the opposite.
Yes, you can. I would argue that this isn't one of those cases because of the way you define the parameters of it with the guppy example. Is it true in the guppies that you can have competing strategies that all have equal fitness? I think what you're
Mathematically, it should be.
Because I think what you're getting at is this ridge of fitness where everybody along that ridge has a
Yeah.
fitness.
Yeah.
I think just wasn't the best example.
Okay, sorry guys, I picked a bad example.
If there's a ridge, then size has no effect, because at all points along the size thing, there's someone who's surviving and reproducing.
That's
Or
true,
has
actually,
been.
and so it can't be equal across the ridge.
And here's one of the tricks. Listen, I realize that we're losing you, but just hang on for a minute. This is actually one of the complications. Dr. Reynolds is a biologist who treats survival and reproduction as traits. And so when she thinks of survival and reproduction, she actually envisions this as she's modeling three different phenotypes that are all interacting together. Whereas other types of biologists, like a behavioral ecologist like me, would look at size and say, this is the trait, and these are just two different ways of measuring fitness.
Right.
And so that's another reason that we're approaching this diagram from different perspectives. I'm treating these as the measures of fitness that are going to be counteracting one another, while she views reproductive output and survival as actual traits. But it's mainly because of the type of biology she does versus the type of biology that I am.
Okay.
Are we out of town?
Not quite, we have a couple more minutes, but what I want to touch on though, because my example was so spectacularly bad, what I'd like to do is just kind of touch on what I want you to take away from this.
Can we table it until Friday, because we don't need the whole time probably to talk about the paper. The paper's not that complicated.
We can. What I'd like to do, optimally, is to kind of overall tell you what I'd like you to be able to do as far as fitness landscapes, and then I'll come up with a better example
I was going to say,
for
let's
Friday.
introduce a really clean example on Friday.
Yes.
We'll talk about what that should be
Yes.
between now and then.
Yeah, I will do that. So what I'd like you to take away from and be able to do though for fitness landscapes is I'd like you to be able to look at a three-dimensional fitness landscape, which I think is a lot more sort of intuitive, and tell me what fitness is doing as particular traits change. And if I were to give you this on an exam, I would have trait values for one trait here, trait values for another trait here, and I would say as one thing changes, or as these two traits have different combinations, what is your relative fitness? So you'd have to say, okay, well if this trait is here and that trait is here, I'm at the peak, right? I have high fitness relative to anybody else. So I want you to be able to read that. I also want you to be able to read the same depiction on a piece of paper that is not in sort of this cartoonish way. And I will give you an example of what that looks like with a better example next time. My apologies. I do have feedback on your literature.
Do you want these too?
Yes, please, you can just put them in a pile on your table.
Clear.
Katie.
I'm just like, I don't understand why there's so much information. I was like, oh, I get it.
Chris called. Yeah, you must have to turn it in. She made comments on that. You can go get from there. Kayla.
I'm just like,
Jordan. Elizabeth. Phelps. Bailey.